your favorite sporting event live and you see a ref call a personal foul or a penalty. Now, this stuff usually happens all the time. You have the ref blow the whistle, call the foul, explain what happened, and carry out the punishment, correct? Now, what if that didn't happen? What if the referee just called it and that was it? No explanation as to what was going on. You'd be pretty upset about that, right? Well, I was upset when I read the editorial titled "Georgia Back in the Death Penalty Spotlight" by the New York Times, and without providing efficient evidence. That is how I felt, upset. Today I'm going to refute and explain why the evidence used in the claims is not sufficient and provide additional and alternative evidence that would help make the claims have more support. So I will preview my main claim, my first subclaim, second subclaim, and I would end with my conclusion. Just like how the referee is supposed to call out a player for committing a foul, it is important that the New York Times is called out in regards to their textual support. The main claim that I want to establish here is that while the claims in the editorial are viable, the evidence used is rather weak and does not provide enough support for each of the claims respectively. For starters, in the second paragraph, first and second sentences, there is statistical evidence that was brought up to support the Supreme Court's moratorium. In 1987, the court upheld another Georgia death sentence of a black man convicted of murdering a white police officer, despite statistical evidence showing that the death penalty was applied far more often when the victim was white than when the victim was black. In the second piece of evidence, which can be found in the third paragraph, fourth sentence, Warren Lee Hill Jr., the man in which the editorial is centered around, quote, has 7 mental health experts all agree with him. 3 of them, all hired by the state, originally testified that he was competent, but later recanted. Lastly, last piece of evidence that I would like to point out is that, which can be found in the 6th paragraph, first sentence. Editorial explained and used evidence such as the test for intellectual disability, stating that, quote, requiring defendants to prove intellectual disability beyond a reasonable doubt, an absurdly difficult standard to meet. With that said, there are a few pieces of information that are missing in the evidence that as a result does not provide enough support. For instance, the evidence concerning the statistic of the death penalty being rolled out more oftentimes when the victim was white is not enough support because it only provided one side of the statistic. There were no other statistics used to discuss the further matter, and the statistic in itself was used out of context. Next, in the evidence which stated that 3 of the 7 health experts went back on their diagnosis of Warren Hill's IQ, there was not enough explanation going into the reason why those 3 health experts recanted their diagnosis. Lastly, the piece of evidence describing Georgia's test for the intellectually disabled did not go into enough detail or development of the nature and logistics of the test. In the 6th paragraph, it was only described as, quote, absurdly difficult, end quote, which does not give a measurable condition. Therefore, opinion is the only evidence used here. Now, luckily in sports, the referee calls are not only explained, but there are also consequences to the calls made. Therefore, alternative action is necessary. To say that the evidence did not provide enough support is only half the battle. There should be additional and alternative evidence that I personally think would help in the context of the editorial. For example, according to the Death Penalty Information Center's document titled 2% Report, statistics for the Southwest region of the United States, which includes Georgia, accounts for more than 80% of the total executions in the entire country. I would seem more helpful to use this as a statistic than to use race, which would create more controversy than would be necessary. It would also support the claim of inconsistency that the New York Times is attempting to state. In another instance, according to the APA Judicial Notebook entry titled Revisiting Intellectual Disability and the Death Penalty, and I quote, APA has filed an amicus brief in support of Hall's appeal, stating that the use of a fixed IQ score to assess intellectual function violates the professional consensus and clinical norms of mental health professionals. Now, who is to say that health experts on Warren Hill's case were under this pretense? By having an explanation coming from the health experts towards the change of diagnosis, in which there could be a fixed IQ score as a reason for why they recanted, they can provide additional evidence towards Hill's intellectual screening and cover their careers as well. Lastly, according to the Scientific American article titled IQ Cutoff for Death Penalty Struck Down by the Supreme Court, and I quote, Supreme Court said that it is unconstitutional for states like Florida to use an IQ score of 70 as a cutoff above which a defendant is considered to be intelligent enough to understand the consequences of his or her actions. That said, the test used by Hill could very well be looked at as an inappropriate means of collecting test results, seeing as how he has long claimed his intellectual disability, therefore providing more insight on the rigor of the test and indicating the disadvantage to those who are put under it is essential. Now that the dust has settled and all the revisions have been made, there still lies one important question. Why does this all matter? This all matters because at the end of the day, in order to help change these inconsistencies within the Georgia prison system, we must first be able to provide a case that is consistent and not full of holes in regards to providing adequate support. The benefits of doing so would, for one, help establish a strong argument for the court system of Georgia as well as the Supreme Court to use in further rulings regarding potential federal reforms involving the death penalty. Lastly, with the help of this support, the state of Georgia can have an idea as to where the reforms can occur and what specific information is viable in order for these reforms to be as successful as possible. As a review, the main claim of refuting the evidence of the New York Times that the evidence is not enough support, and therefore the first subclaim regarded having additional support, which was discussed just now. The second subclaim explained the importance of having enough support as for the benefit of the editorial and the possible use for reforms in the state of Georgia. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this.